Let me briefly introduce today's guest, James Zou. James is an associate professor of biomedical data science, biocourtesy, computer science, electrical engineering at Stanford University, and he leads the Stanford AI for Science Lab. Today, we are delighted to welcome James. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so before we dive in the broader version, perhaps we can start by unpacking some of the projects your team have done recently. Virtual Lab, Virtual Biotech, and Einstein Arena. Maybe you can explain a little bit further about what kind of role each of them plays during that journey.
Yeah. So the context of the society to the AI for Science lab at Stanford, and a big part of our efforts on building AI systems to help to accelerate and to also to automate various kinds of scientific discoveries. And recently, for the past 2 years, we've been building AI scientist agents that can help us to make new kinds of discoveries, right? So we started on that journey by creating the virtual lab, which is a team of a handful of 5 to 8 agents that sort of emulates my physical lab at Stanford. So there's an AI professor agent and different AI student agents, and they have their own group meetings. And we showed that the virtual lab of these agents, right, by having these discussions together, by collaborating on these projects, they were able to actually tackle some quite interesting open-ended research problems. For example, like in designing protein binders, right, to some of the recent SARS-CoV variants that we have experimentally validated. And then the next step after that is that we thought, okay, so can we be even more ambitious now of, in addition to having 5 to 8 agents to simulate one research lab, can we have now thousands of agents that can try to emulate an entire drug discovery company, right? So that led to our next project that we call the virtual biotech, where we have potentially tens of thousands of different agents with different specializations, different expertise, and they would emulate all the different cross-functional roles of a standard pharma company. So that includes agents that are doing, looking for targets, designing molecules, designing proteins, looking at the safety, designing clinical studies, and many other applications. And that's also been super exciting because now that we have many thousands of agents, right, we show that they're able to tackle much more large-scale, more ambitious projects. With the virtual lab and virtual biotech, right? So there, the agents are still agents that we designed ourselves, right? So one of the next directions that I'm very interested in is thinking about how do we even opening that up further so that we can have agents from anywhere in the world that can start to collaborate on these scientific discoveries. Right? So that led to this Einstein Arena. So it's one of the first sort of agent native arenas where any agents, any scientist agents can freely collaborate and compete to tackle real research projects. And we
Mhm.
showed that, within a few weeks of opening that arena, all these agents start to work together on the arena, and they were actually able to solve several the open research problems that have been around for many decades, right? So and these are problems that no agent by itself could actually solve individually. So these are really showcases how when you have many agents in the wild and they start to organically collaborate, they're able to actually solve even harder problems.
So it sounds like a complete and interesting journey across the whole scope, and maybe we can unpack one by one. So for the virtual lab, I think it's very interesting because it offers a new paradigm for human AI cooperation. It's a team of agents that mirrors your physical lab at Stanford, and interdisciplinary AI scientists can work together. And one of the most striking examples from Virtual Lab is that I think the AI can design nanobodies that were laterally mentally validated. I think it's pretty interesting, though. What kind of findings are your team when you're doing experimenting?
Yeah, one thing that we found was pretty interesting is that these agents have different social dynamics when they work together with each other and also with humans, right? And I think that's something that's often underlooked or underexplored. So by social dynamics, we mean like when different humans collaborate, right? People have different personalities, and that can also changes which ideas gets emphasized in the collaboration. And similarly, when AI agents collaborate with other AI agents, right? So different agents also have different personalities, and also depends on which agent talks more than others, right? That it can also changes the trajectory of that collaboration. And what we found in our virtual lab project is that all of those social dynamics for AI actually is really important, right? For example, depends on whether you have the data scientist agent speak first in one of the virtual lab meetings or have an immunologist agent speak first in the virtual lab meeting. That can all change the which ideas and the team ends up pursuing, right? So that led to us to be very interested in trying to really analyze and sort of optimize for the social dynamics among agents. So for example, one way we do this is that we actually run multiple virtual labs in parallel, right? And in parallel virtual labs, we can actually intervene and change the social dynamics, like maybe change, give different personalities to the scientist agents, and then see which configuration actually leads to the most creative ideas and most effective solutions.
So for the agents, they behave like the human scientists. They learn from each other and discuss and maybe debate.
Yeah, yeah. So in that ways, there's some they have some similarity with humans, but they also have their own personalities, right? For example, the basic language models are trained to be, very polite, right? And that's actually sometimes a problem when it comes to scientific research, right? Because often in research, you want the agents to be more, in some sense, a little bit more aggressive intellectually, right? To try to push for their ideas, try to explore new things, and ask sharp questions, right? So that's where having different personalities to the agents.
So during the process, the high efficiently input of human experience is still very important to the agents.
Yeah, the human experience is important. Yeah, and then the agents, their own experience is perhaps even more important in some cases, right? Because they also learn from their previous successes and failures, and we want the agent to be able to accumulate that experience over time.
So moving ahead from virtual lab to virtual biotech, the virtual biotech feels like a shift toward scientific decision making. And we can see that it's evaluating targets, assessing safety, selecting modalities, and even reasoning about clinical outcomes. It seems it behaves like more a biotech company.
Yeah, yeah. So this is where because in the human biotech company, right, there are many different roles, and many of these companies have thousands or tens of thousands of employees, and everybody have their own specialized role. And because these drug discovery is so complex, right, there are many different steps to it. This is where we thought actually it could be quite advantageous to having agentic biotech companies, because in standard human biotech companies, right, as the drug asset is passed from one team to the next team, there's often a lot of information that's lost because of limitations in human communication, right? And with agentic teams, I think there's a real there's ways to get around that problem where the agents can actually share much broader context. Right? So all of those insights from early discoveries can then be passed on to later stages of clinical studies and vice versa without information loss.
We know that the process for the drug design is pretty complete in phase one, two, three, and maybe little in this complete processing. We know that the process for DMTA, design, make, test, analyze, and it's a whole process to need the agents to do more scientific process to make the system better.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this is where by being able to keep much broader context than human research teams, this is where the agents can be quite useful, right? And because we found this that when you have many of these like clinical trial studies or drug discovery, therapeutic design tasks requires many different domains of expertise. This is also where we can have many scientist agents that have very diverse expertise.
In one example you mentioned in last year's Stanford lecture, you mentioned the single cell biology. And I'm curious about, will single cell biology play a large role in future target discovery? And what opportunities excite you most at the intersection of AI and single cell data?
Yeah, so I think the power of the single cell biology is that it really enables us to understand at a very high resolution, right? Like what's the impact of specific drugs or specific mutations or on a specific cell, right? And that can also be very useful for understanding the mechanisms of potential therapeutics or disease. So that's why I think more and more now people are starting to collect a lot of single cell data. This could be single cell gene expression, so in the form of transcriptomics or single cell protein measurements. And we've also been doing a lot of work on spatial data where we're actually looking at all these single cells in a tissue. Right. So I think those are all super very useful for both basic biology and also for understanding diseases. What the virtual biotech agents found, which is something pretty interesting, which is that they found that these single cell features are also can be highly predictive of which drug targets are more likely to lead to successful clinical trials. Right. So that's a really important problem because many of these trials are very expensive to run. It could be many millions of dollars to run each of the trials. So it'd be super helpful if we can tell ahead of time which trials are more likely or less likely to be successful based on the targets. And what the virtual biotech agents actually showed is that if you have a trial that's targeting some specific genes, and if those target genes have, for example, cell type specific expression patterns, or they have that so-called bimodal gene expression patterns, which we can tell from single cell analysis, then those trials are much more likely to be successful in terms of like reaching market, right? So that's actually, I think, quite interesting and can help us to decide how to prioritize drug targets.
Hmm. And the CD276 study is a very compelling example of AI-assisted target discovery. So, what kind of takeaways you would like to share during the discovery?
Yeah, so that's one of the case studies we asked the virtual biotech agents to help us to do, which is to design therapeutic strategies for for this transmembrane protein, which has this kind of like immune suppression effect, right? And the agents were looking at this in the case of lung cancer,
Hmm.
and by analyzing a lot of different types of data from genetics to single cell to spatial to clinical data, the agents actually came up with some really interesting mechanistic hypothesis about like how is this drug target acting in different patients and which cell types is the most relevant for this target protein. So based on that, the agents then designed a particular therapeutic strategy. It's called antibody drug conjugate, which was sort of independently confirmed by Merck in their own experiments as being quite effective as a therapeutic strategy for looking at these lung cancer patients. It's still, I think, in relatively early stages of testing, right? There needs to be more experiments, but Merck actually received FDA breakthrough designation for this ADC strategy specifically for this target.
So the role just behave the same like the big pharmaceutical company like Merck. So it shows a great potential room for the future development of this kind of domain.
That's right. Yeah. So this is a really nice example of how this team of agents, right, by working together, they're able to actually derive new insights, right, which is sort of independently confirmed, consistent with what like a pharma company was did.
So what kind of bottlenecks do you think still exist right now?
Yeah, I think in drug discovery in particular, one big bottleneck is that first there's a lot of tacit knowledge in drug discovery that's not really written down in data or in documents.
Mhm.
Right? But it's really important, and currently it's difficult for AI to learn about those kinds of experience because it's not really captured in data.
Mhm.
So that's one limitation. The second limitation is that certainly the wet lab experimental validations can still quite take some time. And
Mhm.
most of the existing wet lab validations are more done on cell assays, right? But translating that to animal models and
Mhm.
then going from animal models to human studies, it's a real big challenge. And there, um, I think the data is still very expensive, very hard to collect.
Mhm. So it's still a lot of improvement to be done in the future.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
So moving ahead, we can see the work as Einstein Arena, and it's like a kind of work AI can collaborate in the wild to advance science. So I think I'm curious about what motivated the idea of creating an environment where AI agents can cooperate and compete on open scientific problems. You know that in LLM environment, we know that there was a project called Chapel Arena. It's all the kind of different models may compete in the same environment and maybe to compete against some scores. But I think Einstein Arena is more interesting because for AI they can cooperate in the wild, and it's
Yeah.
not just to compete. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, if we look at science, right,
Mhm.
throughout history, often humans as a society were able to make a lot of scientific progress because there's a lot of collaborations among
Yeah.
different scientists.
Mhm.
And as problems become more and more complex, right, then we really need to leverage the collective intelligence of many researchers to
Hmm.
help to work together to tackle those bigger problems. Right? That's how the fields of biology and math and physics and astronomy, they're able to make progress over time. And if we look at how AI agents work, right, currently it's mostly AI agents that work in isolation, right? So maybe, I create my own agents and my agents work on the problem and you create your agents, right? But my agents do not collaborate with your agents. And we think that's like a really big missed opportunity, right? So our motivation for creating Einstein Arena is that we really want to be able to harness the collective intelligence of all these agents, right, that people are creating. I think in the near future, there will be many millions of AI scientist agents. And we want to be able to harness the collective intelligence of all those millions of scientist agents so they can start to collaborate, right, on a massive scale and be able to really make new discoveries that no agent would be able to do by itself. Right.
Hmm.
And I think that sort of also follows the human experience, because many of the discoveries, the most important discoveries, was not possible by a single human researcher working in isolation, right? It really required a team of many different researchers that collaborate to make progress there. So that's why we created the Science Arena so that we have this platform where AI agents can organically collaborate, right? And then start to actually tackle these harder problems.
I think one interesting news yesterday I came across is that Anthropic introduced MetaSphy and shared some examples where the model can autonomously design proteins, generated biological hypotheses, and even conducted genomics research over the course of just 1 week. So I'm a little bit curious about that. Do you think in the future the scientific discovery may look like a super intelligent scientist, or more like you mentioned before, a scientific community composed of thousands of AI agents?
It's a good question. I think these are actually quite complementary, right? Because as the base models continue to improve,
Yeah.
right, you get GPT-5, GPT-6, GPT-7, or Claude 6, right? As these models improve, I think there's even become even easier for different researchers to build their own agents and to build their own assistant agents on top of those base models. Right? So that just means that it's going to be even easier for thousands of human researchers to create millions of different research agents, right? And each of those agents maybe would have different access to different tools, right? They will also learn from the human researchers with their own priors and own perspectives, right? So I think it's not the choice between having one super intelligence model, right, versus having a bunch of different agents. I think we'll have millions of super intelligence scientist agents models, and then by having all of these models work together, right, by harnessing their collective intelligence, then we'll be able to actually tackle even harder and more ambitious projects.
Yeah, nowadays I've observed some startup companies, they are building biotech environments for the agents. They collect all the tools and all the data sets to make the agents environments better to help exist the scientists to work better. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I think it's a very exciting intersection, especially as AI and biology, which is also why so many companies, startups and also large companies are focusing on this intersection now.
Hmm. So if you zoom out across all these projects, so what's your vision about the future?
At the big picture, I think this is really the most exciting time for science
Yeah.
in human history, right? I think this is really the golden age of science. And my vision is that these AI scientist agents would help work together with humans to greatly accelerate discoveries, right? So behind every human researcher, I would like to have like a team of virtual scientist agents, right, or virtual lab or virtual biotech that helps that human researcher then to do much more ambitious and more creative and also more robust, more reproducible research, right? And I think this also enables new forms of collaborations that's not possible before, right? One of our efforts is to actually identify all of human knowledge. We call this like paper to agent, essentially taking all of the human knowledge and converting that into dynamic agents that sort of becomes then almost like a living embodiment of that knowledge. So then this knowledge agents then can start to collaborate with each other, generate new discoveries, new findings, right? And this can really greatly expand the surface area of knowledge that's not really bottlenecked by human communications.
Hmm. As we can see that the model intelligence is getting stronger. increasingly capable AI systems become widely available, and maybe a best word to describe as democratization. So, what do you think the real differentiator between different labs and different scientists to let them stand out?
Well, I think often the one thing that separates different human researchers, different scientists, is a question of taste and judgment, right? Researchers, have different tastes, right? And maybe they all have sort of similar technical skills and backgrounds, right? But some really great researchers often have different kinds of judgment and taste compared to other researchers, right? I think that's still something that's really important for the human scientists to bring to the table, right? So people have their different perspectives, biases in sort of a good way, right? I think it's good for people to have different biases because otherwise then somehow it becomes too homogeneous, right? So I think it's useful to have this diversity of opinions, diversity of perspectives, and that's really still important for humans to emphasize even more now with the AI.
The taste nowadays is very popular world in different domains. So what do you think how taste can be developed for a young researcher? You know, they may not have a great experiences or a great training in the early career, but but taste is really important nowadays. So what do you think how the way of developing taste?
Yeah, I think that's a definitely a really important question. In my advice to a lot of young researchers is that first, I think they should try to find things that they are excited about, right? Do not try to follow the big trend. Don't work on something just because it's popular or because other people are working on it, right? Find things that they are personally passionate and excited about. And with that in mind, I think it's also good for people, for researchers to focus on things that are more foundational, right? Things that would still be important in 5 years, in 10 years, that's not going to just change or be replaced as in a few months, right? As models get better. So really focus on these really foundational ideas that likely have lasting value over time.
So I think AI for science is more interdisciplinary research. So it needs a different domain knowledge, especially, for example, if we're AI background, maybe a computer science background, student wants to get into the area of AI for science, he or she may need to know, get more knowledge about biology, chemistry, or physics. So some of my friends told me that a little bit hard for them to real extract the knowledge from such a domain. So they need to communicate with these major students to get more collaboration. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is true. I think it is important to do really good work in AI for science. One needs to have some knowledge about science, right? To know like what are really important scientific problems and also to come up with good ideas. So I think that domain knowledge is really important. In the past, there's definitely has been some communication barriers, right, of learning about the language of physics or language of chemistry or biology. I think that is actually much easier now with the help of AI itself, right? So it's actually, I think, much easier now for researchers to learn information and keep up to date across different domains, right, through the help of AI that can help to like summarize literature and explain different things. So I think it's actually much easier now to do these interdisciplinary collaborations.
hmm So, and the high agency is still very important for nowadays students.
Yes, yeah.
So, as AI becomes capable of generating hypotheses, we know there are some examples of generating great hypotheses maybe can be validated. And AI also can design experiments, maybe write papers. Nowadays, there are a lot of papers because of the coding agents development. So, what aspects of being a scientist should remain fundamentally human?
Yeah, I think there are many motivations why people want to become scientists, right? I think for many of us, like we're scientists because we really actually love the process of doing science, right? And we really like the process of, for example, tackling a mathematics problem or developing a new algorithm or making a discovery in biology. And I think if people are excited about that process, then they should definitely still be involved in the process, right? They should not just offload that process to AI completely, because then that will take away a lot of the fun and the joy of science, which is what we're all excited about. I think
Hmm.
in addition to being excited about the process of doing science, right, the other reason why many people are excited about science is the impact, right? It's
Hmm.
just the actual final outcomes, right? Like if we actually discover a drug that can be really helpful for patients, then it's great, right? Then they can really benefit society. And
Hmm.
so I think often these two things are related, but they're also somewhat separate goals, right? And I think it's important for each researcher to try to clearly understand like how much do they want to focus on the process or how much are they interested in the final outcomes, right? And if they're interested in the final outcomes, then the best thing to do there would be try to get to the good drug, right? The good discovery as effectively as possible and making sure all the steps are robust, right, and reliable. But it's really the outcome that's really important. If it's more about the process, then it's sort of a different mentality. Then the researchers want to really understand every step and really right. And I think both approaches are very valuable. And I'm actually personally very interested in both type of approaches, right? But I do think that the people want to be able to clearly articulate for a specific research project, right? What is their goal? Are they more interested in a scientific process, or are they really interested more in the outcome?
So both the process and outcome are a genuine experience for human scientists. So they need to enjoy the whole process and maybe for the outcomes, yeah.
Yes.
So moving back to your personal journey, I would like to dive on the more personal note. And you trained in mathematics and physicals and completed mathematics at Cambridge and then pursued interdisciplinary research at Harvard. So how does this whole journey shape the way you think about important scientific problems? And looking back, what principles have guided you here?
Yeah, I think it's actually quite related to, to this idea of really enjoying both the process, but also keeping an eye on the outcomes. I was grew up, I think, just really enjoy doing math and also enjoy like writing code and programming. And I think that's sort of just fun for me, right? Like if I didn't have other things to do, I probably just want to do that anyways, just because it's fun. And that's why I decided to continue to study math, and I became interested in machine learning and AI because I think it's a really good intersection of both math and algorithms. And then as I was looking at, what are really important problems to tackle using math and algorithms, it seems like a lot of problems in medicine and healthcare are some of the most important problems that we could study as a society, right? And it can also have the largest benefit, in addition to being intellectually just very interesting. So I think that's sort of why for me, this area of like AI for science is particularly exciting because then we can both work on really exciting new algorithms and also have like I think very fundamental and high impact applications.
So nowadays, do you think that it's still important to have a solid trend of mathematics and physics? I think many excellent researchers, they also have a very solid training during their undergraduate or graduate student.
I think so. I think it's probably even more important now because there's a lot of noise, right? A lot of people maybe can do sort of similar things. I think the best way to stand out is having some more like deeper understanding or deeper technical skills beyond what other people have, right? I think that's what makes a student or a researcher more unique, right? And one way to do that is to like, just to go deeper than other people, right? If a lot of people are sort of scratching the surface about some particular topic, if you go really deep, then you are going to be very unique, right? And then that's going to make you very valuable, both for in academia, but also in industry.
So it's still very important to have a very solid training of those basic elementary, yeah, training of those domains.
And
Yeah.
to go very deep, yes.
It's very important. And another question I'm curious about, that AI for science increasingly depends on compute foundation models in large data sets. That in academia sometimes it scarce these resources. So do you think this kind of risk may be concentrating discovery in a few companies in other institutions? How does academia keep pace?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely it's important to continue to make investments in academia, because many of the best ideas, even now, still come from universities. And And I think it's also universities also play a very complementary role, right? Because a lot of the companies they work on sort of specific products and specific ideas. As these companies grow bigger, they also tend to become more and more closed, right? More proprietary. And in order to have this ecosystem of innovations, right, I think the best ideas often still come from people exploring less mainstream topics, right? And that's where I think academia is really important for doing that. In terms of
Hmm.
the compute resources, I think it's sort of a little bit double-edged sword, right? I've seen examples where if people have a lot of compute resources, they feel obligated, almost obligated to work on certain projects that needs to use a lot of compute resources. That in some ways also limits their creativity, right? Because then they're often maybe taking more brute force approaches or more engineering heavy approaches, or doing some things that other people are always doing, right? But just scaling that up, which is is useful, but may not lead to new ideas.
Hmm. So it's really interesting to think in another way. Limits may create creativity. So for academia, it's also important to bet a direction. Maybe you can see that some of the great discoveries may have some great insights from the earlier times because the right bet. So what kind of opinions do you think the bets in academia?
I think one of the nice things about academia is that people have a lot of flexibility to work on different projects, and they can also change very quickly, right? I think that's one of some things I often advise to my own students is that they can work on multiple projects simultaneously, maybe sometimes two projects, sometimes three, right? And if they have a new idea, then they can very easily explore that new idea, right? They don't need to convince their manager, try to explore that, or they don't need to apply for funding, right? If they have a new idea, just go and do it. I think that's one of the nice things about academia is that people could have the flexibility to actually take many bets, right? And then also be able to explore new ideas very quickly.
So looking forward, what's your bet in the following years?
I think one of my, bets is, as we discussed, I think this idea of the collective intelligence of many AI scientist agents that collaborate, right? I think that's going to become increasingly important as more and more people are going to be building their own agents. So I think that's something I'm very excited about. Another thing that's related to that is that understanding sort of how to design good communities of AI agents, right? So how do we actually design the mechanisms through which these agents collaborate? I think that's going to become an increasing part of research.
Hmm. So looking forward to your future teamwork. I think a lot of people, especially young people, trying to figure out their path will really benefit from your perspective. Thanks again for taking the time to join us today, James. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I enjoyed the discussions.
Thank you.